Okay, so I posted a short the other day of fried chicken, and I thought maybe it might be useful to see how it's made. Bear with me, I have never recorded myself cooking before. The first thing I do is I take a bunch of eggs and I crack them into a decent sized bowl. I don't really have an exact number how many eggs I use. It depends on how much chicken I'm cooking at the time. I've got about 3 pounds of chicken I'm working through today. So I'm just going to estimate a rough number of eggs that I'll need to have a generous amount to coat my chicken. And washing my hands before I go to get my electric mixer. You can do this by hand. I don't want to anymore. Cornstarch is probably the most important ingredient after the actual chicken. I didn't figure this part out until sadly my mid-20s, probably a good decade after I'd started trying to figure out how to make fried chicken. But whipping the cornstarch into the eggs will create what is known as an egg wash. So I'm mixing this pretty well, obviously making care to get everything I can off of the sides and into the actual mix. I'm looking to get any noticeable lumps out, but beyond getting the lumps out, you don't need to whip it like a meringue or anything fancy. Just make sure it's all homogeneous. Took me a few years to figure out the whole concept of cleaning as I go, but putting away my electric mixer, as you see here, I have finally started figuring it out, and it really does help with keeping a peaceful workplace. Starting on the dry batter portion, I like to use a Pyrex like this. No real reason, I just have a bunch of them and the shape is convenient for how I do it. Before I start, I gather all of the things that are going to go into the dry mix so I don't forget anything halfway through. And the first thing I dump in is a lot of flour, usually 2 to 3 cups, depending on, once again, how much chicken I'm using. You'll find that I use much more dry mix than you probably think is necessary, but it is for a reason. Now, when adding your spices to the dry mix, it doesn't really matter what you start with. I just typically start with the things that I use the largest quantity of and go down the line. So here I'm starting with chili powder. Dump in a pretty generous amount of that. Then I go to garlic powder. This is a new thing, so it takes me a couple tries to wrench the thing open. Once again, a generous amount of garlic powder. Then I go to black pepper. I realize I'm not going to have enough of it, so I get a backup thing of black pepper. And that one's out. Into the trash. New one. Rip off the freshness seal. And a ton of black pepper. Then we go to onion powder. I add this because I feel exclusive if I don't, even though I don't like onion powder. Ginger. Ground ginger. I love this a lot. I use it in everything. Everything. I like this a lot. I like this a lot. And ground mustard. And what I find the most important, cumin, or cumin. Cumin? I don't know. And a generous amount of that because I think it's the thing that, beyond the ginger, which is actually gives it a nice spice, adds the most flavor to the palate. I use a lot of spices because they will all blend into the flour. And you'll notice I did not add salt, and that is because it's granular and it will fall to the bottom in the dust of the powdered spices and the flour, so it won't stick to the chicken. I use this tiny whisk because I like it, and I just mix until there are no more little pockets of spice, until once again everything is homogeneous. And now we actually batter the chicken. We take a piece and we coat it thoroughly in the egg wash. And when we lift it, we let some, but not all, of the wash drip off. And then we place it in the dry. And I just rake the flour over it. And then I reach well under and lift and rake again. I try to touch the chicken as little as possible and try and leave the flour as a good barrier between my fingers and it so that the coating sticks well. And I put it on the side and I cover it up. And I go on to the next piece and I repeat. I leave the chicken in the flour for a very specific reason. I used to set it on a ready plate when it was done being battered, but the chicken continues to absorb into the flour, so it will get kind of, I don't know, sloppy looking if you leave it to sit on the counter. So I let it sit in the flour so that as the moisture absorbs into the flour, there's more flour to end up getting stuck into the coating. I do about 3 pieces at a time because that is how much my fry pan can cook without crowding them, and I am using thighs because I have a weak spot for dark meat. Now my hands are filthy and I need to wash them. I'm going to be using a wonderful bristle brush that I believe I accidentally take into the frame at some point in time, if I'm not mistaken. But this stuff definitely gets under your fingernails. If you have something to help you clean under them, I would highly recommend it if you don't keep a large stock of plastic gloves on hand. Now, the first batch is actually in the fry pan now, but I'll show you that after I finish battering the whole batch. I'll clip that video in at the end of the battering parts, but I wanted to have it look kind of cohesive. Once again, I don't know what I'm doing, so bear with me. As I'm burying this, I said earlier that I'll probably use more dry mix than looks necessary, but it's because I want to try and physically touch and scrape with my fingers the chicken as little as possible, and the more space I have in the pan, the easier that is. Now once I get down to the third piece in this second batch, I actually start running out of room a little bit. I'm digging around to try and get enough flour to coat it without scraping it. And that's just the second piece. Burying it again. And now on to third. You can't really see, but I'm having a little difficulty making sure I don't scrape the batter off of this piece as I'm digging for enough flour to coat it. So that's why I use an excess amount of flour, And sadly, after this is done, it will all have to be immediately thrown away because it's come in contact with raw chicken, so it cannot be reused. But I still find it worth it. Now I'm going to wash my hands again. And my favorite scrub brush. Oops. Now perspective switch, so you can see me laying them in the pan. Obviously the oil is already preheated. Try and get to 325. Don't crowd the chicken in the pan. As far as temperature goes, it's going to fluctuate up and down. Down when you put in the chicken and when you flip it. But 325 is the target temperature. As you can see, I have a thermometer in the back. And if it goes lower than that, it's better than if it goes higher. It just means a little bit of a longer cooking time rather than burning. You can see I'm gently manipulating the chicken to test where the edges of each piece are and make sure they're not touching each other and getting stuck together and making sure they're not crowded. Now I'm going to flip it because the bottom will have already crisped up while the top will still be soggy. And if I do this now, then I won't have to worry about possibly removing the coating from the chicken later. I'm being very ginger throughout the entire thing. Now I'm skipping a lot of the time that I'm spending on frying the actual chicken and just showing you small progress clips of me flipping them and whatnot, so you can kind of get an idea of how they look. I originally intended for this to have some of the original sound so that you could hear what the chicken sounded like as well, because that's how I tell that it's done. But you can always comment for a description or use a meat thermometer. You may be able to tell at some points that I'm being a little rougher on my pan than I am my chicken. That is exactly why I'm using the cast iron. I don't want the utensils I'm using to scrape the coating off the chicken, so I'd much prefer to scrape the bottom of the pan. I don't have to worry about removing a non-stick coating or using metal tools when I'm using my cast iron. This is the only thing I use the cast iron for. I don't give a crap about the seasoning. I just want a heavy-duty thing with which to heat oil to near 400 degrees. And that is my friend the cast iron. Now we're about ready to start pulling the first batch of chicken out of the fryer. I put down some paper towel to absorb the grease that drips off. And then I use a grate so that it can dry without being smothered. And a plate so that I don't drip oil on the floor, transferring from pan to drying rack. And salt. Because. I'm not in a huge rush to get the chicken from pan to rack, mainly because it'll take a few minutes to dry off, so I'll have some time to apply the salt before it's too dry to stick. But this is when I do end up applying the salt, since it can't really hold its own in the batter. I just apply it to the exterior of the coating while it's still moist from the fry pan, and I found that this works beautifully. A good deal of this chicken is going to be fed to humans under the age of 2, so I figure I give you a clip of me cutting it up just so you can see what it's like on the inside. Shot with, I hope, a close-up that will end up clear so you can see how nicely coated these things turned out. And that is how you make fried chicken. If you'd like to ask me any questions whatsoever, feel free to leave a comment and I will likely respond.